justice, the people's champion, champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace.
Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Justice. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
I think this week we are in a bit of a resilient mood. Yeah,
I can agree with that. An overcoming mood.
Yes, we're grateful to be here. And I think we must start the show with recognizing and paying tribute, saying our thanks to frontline workers who helped us to deal with what was Hurricane Beryl that still continues to impact other countries. But to the Jamaica Constabulary Force, your leadership, your presence, it was felt. We appreciate you. To the healthcare workers who, despite having their own families, being left at home, we appreciate you being on call. To the firefighters, we appreciate you. We see you. We thank you for your service. To the Jamaica Public Service Company, we see the comments online, and this was, after all, a Category 4 hurricane. And we see you're being pushed, rushed, encouraged, but we appreciate you. At this time of the day, I believe that some 77% of the country is now with electricity based on the last data. So JPS workers who are also putting their lives at risk to ensure that there's some normalcy. We see you, we appreciate you. National Work Agency, the National Water Commission, all of the service providers who are there working to ensure that the country can return to normal and we can see businesses up and running. We appreciate your service during this time. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Now, a Category 4 hurricane struck, and we must send our prayers, Jade, and to residents, citizens in 3 parishes in particular who were hardest hit. Those in Clarendon, sections of Manchester, and those particularly in St. Elizabeth. Some of the videos and the photos that we saw, it was hard to look at it. We give God thanks that we didn't have as many lives being disrupted as possibly could have been. But it's difficult for some people to even recover anytime soon.
I have to agree with that.
And
it's not just about the physical. There's a mental component to loss. While we didn't see much of it, as you said, there were some places that were harder hit. You see some videos online, people have lost their residence or have encountered severe damage. I am a Hampton old girl, and our chapel was severely damaged, and that chapel has been there for more than 150 years now. So there is that emotional component to the loss as well. So we hope that everybody stays strong through this period of time.
Monroe College as well. It's really sad. So where you can support, where you can give back, we encourage you to. I don't have all the agencies at hand, but you can reach out to the usual Salvation Army, Food for the Poor. I think the 2 political parties, they are also offering some support. So we encourage you to donate however you can to those who are most in need. And just to say, I think as a social media user, I saw the best and worst of social media for the past couple of days, but I won't focus on the worst. I will just say I saw a couple of users, for example, Lauren Pert from Blue Dot Polls, Manish Water is his handle, I believe, went into St. Elizabeth, car packed, chainsaw in the trunk. You have others who went down, gathered support. Tony, translator, Antoinette, also put together, rallied the crew, so to speak, and got the support from a Terry Carroll Reed and others, and went down and they gave back. And I think that is the type of community support we like to see in the country.
Absolutely.
And you have many others who have been silently giving, So we salute you and we encourage others to lend support. But just generally, that is the type of humanity that we want to see, that type of empathy and compassion. So when a country is in crisis, we have to all step up to the plate and get the job done, because resilience is a critical part. But empathy must be accompanied by that, yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so our topic for today, quite timely. Climate justice.
Yes.
That's the word we've been hearing from several prime ministers, so we're going to be having that discussion today.
Yes, and I'm going to preempt you by giving us our right of the day. And it's a bit related. So we don't have a right to health. But we do have a right to a healthy and productive environment that is free from threat of injury or damage from environmental abuse and degradation of ecological heritage. And that last bit about environmental abuse and degradation of ecological heritage is what ties in to our little climate justice conversation today, and should help to protect us from negative climate action. But that is section 13.3L of our constitution. We also have a trivia question for today, and it is also on topic. And that question is, when did Jamaica ratify the Paris Agreement? And we'll talk a little bit about the Paris Agreement, I think, today in our discussions as we talk about actions that we've taken to address climate change. So you can respond to that by sending a WhatsApp message to 2397583, or you can respond on our social media pages via DM.
Yeah.
All
right. We didn't welcome our listeners. We should have. We thank you so much for being with us each week. Those on YouTube watching, those who are listening via Radio Land, those on JFJ's YouTube platform as well. We're happy that you're all safe, and, we continue to give thanks together, yeah?
Yes.
All right, so we're discussing climate justice for Jamaica and the Caribbean, and we're going to be joined by Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, who is opposition spokesperson on environment and ecological heritage. We're also going to be joined by Joala Ramaran, who is a senior economic advisor with the Caribbean Policy Development Center. He's a former central bank governor of Trinidad and Tobago, and also Theresa Rodriguez Moody, who's the executive director of Jamaica Environment Trust, JET. And in discussing climate justice, I think we must start with a quote that just ran deep. We deserve and we demand climate justice. These were the sentiments that we heard from several prime ministers, including our own Andrew Holness and Dickon Mitchell of Grenada, as they bemoan the catastrophic effects of climate change on small island developing states. Now, the recent passage of Hurricane Beryl across the Caribbean has highlighted the long-standing conversations regarding the disproportionate impact of climate change on small islands, affecting people through adverse weather conditions such as rising global temperatures and storm surges.
We also want to address the fact that this storm, this hurricane, is a direct result of the climate crisis that Grenada, the Caribbean, and other small island developing states are on the front line of. And so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in conjunction with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Resilience, and Renewable Energy, will form a task force to address this issue and to bring it to the international community's attention, to recognize that we demand and deserve climate justice. We are no longer prepared to accept that it is okay for us to constantly suffer significant, clearly demonstrated loss and damage arising from climatic events and be expected to rebuild, be expected to borrow, to rebuild year after year, while the countries that are responsible for creating the situation and exacerbating the situation sit idly by with platitudes and tokenism.
No, that was the Prime Minister of Grenada, Dickon Mitchell.
Now, there have been coordinated efforts at the levels of the Caribbean community consistently advocating for concrete global actions to address climate change, such as limiting global warming to less than 1.5 degrees. The region has also actively engaged in innovative finance mechanisms, such as the Bridgetown Initiative and the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index, forming parts of the reparatory justice and debt for climate change and conservation swaps. Yes, so with COP29 slated to be held in November 2024 in Baku, Azerbaijan, what more can be done by the Caribbean community, and how can we reasonably strengthen our resilience when so much of the catalyst is outside of our control? So we're going to be joined by, as Mikhail said, Senator Fraser Binns, Teresa Rodriguez Moody, and we are already joined by Joala Ramaran.
So we take the break, and before we do, just think on a couple things. $1 billion in agricultural loss. That's the word coming from Minister of Agriculture, Floyd Green. And, you know, we've seen the devastating impact that some of these issues have had on the parishes of St. Elizabeth that we have mentioned earlier. So we take the break, and then we're going to be discussing on the other side what exactly can we do and how exactly can we get some compensation from the countries that we can see are largely to be blamed for some of the catastrophic effects that we've been seeing in our own here in Jamaica and some of the other smaller Caribbean islands. We take the break.
Presenting another finalist in the 2024 Jamaica Festival Song Competition.
Wago in Jamaica, it's your boy Casey Donaldson. The title of my song is Sweet Jamaica. Everybody want come down here for the food and for hear patois. Oh, my fun love, number one in the world. We lick the but we talawa. Yeah, hungry, a sweet, sweet charm down. We have a roast red fruit and
Jamaica Festival 2024.
Oh, every time I pay the rent, it feel like the money could have been better spent. I want something for my own. I want to turn the key in my own home. They make it so convenient when you contact the NHD. No matter your home ownership goal, you can get a loan easily. If owning a home is what you want to do, NHD is here for you. Delivering more.
Caribbean Airlines Reggae Sumfest and Appleton Estate presents Jamaica Rum Festival Blitz.
On Thursday, July 18th, Catherine Hall Stadium, Montego Bay. Gates open at 1 p.m. Enjoy rum seminar, rum tastings, and Beanie Man performing as Moses Davis. Music by Walshy Fire of Major Lazo, Bloodline Franco, Rush One Road Marshall, and DJ Ashai. Tickets are available at reggaesumfest.com.
Sponsored by Magnum, Ray and Nephew, Appleton Estate, Jamaica Tourist Board, H&L Rapid True Value.
Must be 18 years and older to drink. Drink responsibly.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're discussing the matter of climate justice, not only for Jamaica, but for the Caribbean region. Just to indicate as well that we had extended an invitation to Environment Minister Matthew Samuda, who indicated that he's not available, but we are certainly appreciative of those who we have to tap into their expertise, their knowledge and thought on this particular area. And as a reminder, we have Joala Rambaran, who is a senior economic advisor with the Caribbean Policy Development Center. We have Senator Sophie Fraser Binns, who is the opposition spokesperson on environment and ecological heritage. And we also have Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody, who is the executive director of Jamaica Environment Trust. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Mikkel here and Jade as well. Senator is not on as yet.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us as well.
Greatly appreciated. Dr. Modi, let's start with you. We've seen what is happening. We've heard that we have more to come. And I think there's an article in the Gleaner that states that we should be bracing for more, let me call them disturbances, such as Hurricane Beryl. What is your immediate, in terms of climate change and what we should be looking at?
Yes, Prof. Taylor spoke in the newspaper today. He had several quotes in the paper, and one of the things that I think is highlighted is this whole conversation about unprecedented. And I would tell you, I was a little distressed when I saw some of the social media comments because, and I think it shows a lack of understanding where people are saying things like, oh, but we've always had Category 5 hurricanes. This is not climate change. I think what needs to be taken home by people is that these kind of intense hurricanes were not a part of our regular climate cycle. What we're seeing with the climate crisis is that we're seeing these more unprecedented type of events. The more intense hurricanes are happening. Something that would have been a 1 in 500 year event, we're seeing happening more frequently. Right? Intense rainfall. We're seeing higher temperatures. Last year we had unprecedented temperatures. In Jamaica this year it wasn't as bad, but you're seeing in other parts of the world, people are dying from heat stress. The point is that these kind of extremes is something that we need to prepare for more because it is going to be a part of our future. It is right now, but it is more of these to come.
Yeah.
And so the point is we cannot continue with the business as usual, and that is something that needs to be stressed. How we build has to change. Where we build, where we allow people to live has to change, because otherwise these bills that we're seeing coming out of Hurricane Beryl, where we talk about $1 billion of impact in the agriculture sector, will only get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And harder to recover from.
I just wanted to follow up on that quickly, because yes, you're kind of pointing to actions that, how we build, where we build. How much are we ourselves contributing to the climate crisis here? And what are our first mitigating steps?
So remember, climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, right? And in terms of Jamaica as a contributor, we're very, very small as a contributor to this. And so even if we were to completely get off of the fossil fuel grid and completely change, there's very little that Jamaica itself can do to mitigate and really change what is happening globally. However, how we choose to manage our environment, how we choose to build, that has a big deal, because the environment helps to protect us from the impacts of climate change. So we play a big part in exacerbating the very risks that we're facing. So while we can't maybe not do much in terms of cutting back on the fossil fuel usage, because we are such a 0.001 percentage, we can do a lot in terms of adapting and changing the way we build. So, for example, mangroves. You don't want to cut down mangroves because they play an important role in protecting our coastal environments. So, simple things like that needs to be addressed.
Joalo, we've heard from the Prime Minister's, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness of Jamaica, indicating that he's going to be speaking much more on climate justice. And I think we heard that profound statement coming from Prime Minister Mitchell as well, encouraging those of us to pay keener attention to climate change and to demand more of those who are actually causing greater harm. From where you sit, if you could just walk us through quickly, what exactly does climate justice mean, and what exactly should we be demanding within the Caribbean region?
Okay, sure. But before I do that, let me, on behalf of the Caribbean Policy Development Center, express solidarity with our Caribbean brothers and sisters whose lives and livelihoods have really been affected by Hurricane Beryl. Both Prime Minister Holden and Prime Minister Deacon, they've spoken commendably about the need for climate justice. As a matter of fact, just over a month ago, we had what we call the SIDS 4 conference in Antigua, and the UN Secretary General, said that SIDS are a test case for climate justice. And that's something that we live almost every year, in particular during the hurricane season. But from a civil society point of view, we also say there's no climate justice unless there is debt justice. And we say that because many Caribbean countries are caught in what we call a middle-income country debt for climate change trap. And this is because many of these countries are heavily indebted. Let's take the example of Jamaica, Grenada, St. Vincent. All countries that have been hit by Hurricane Beryl are countries where their debt to GDP ratios are somewhere between 60 to 80% to GDP, which is well above what is considered sustainable. And they all spend significant amounts of public money servicing debt when that money could be used on in other areas, particularly now where we see the immediate need to put monies into relief and recovery. And therefore, we have to, when we start talking about climate justice, we also have to start speaking about how we also deal with the debt situation facing these countries. And that is why CPDC has been working along with its international partners in the global civil society space to do a number of things. One in particular is really strong advocacy on the fact that Caribbean countries need to have eligibility for greater amounts of concessional funding. We cannot keep us moving on along in the business as usual circumstances where we see now, where these countries have been hit. They have to now borrow, mainly because they are fiscally constrained. They have to borrow to undertake relief, recovery, and even the longer term reconstruction efforts that are required. And that means that borrowing typically is coming in the form of loans. And we are saying, no, we need to have concessional funding. We need to have low cost funding, or we need to have grant based funding. And that means strong advocacy, especially at the World Bank, where it all starts, because the World Bank uses the per capita income metric to classify Caribbean countries, and therefore they're now classified basically as middle income countries. Some are merely upper middle income countries, and a few are even considered high income. But that doesn't talk about the vulnerability that these countries have, particularly when we talk about the climate crisis.
And how will the multidimensional vulnerability index help with that as an example?
Yes, right. So there have been various calls to use this multidimensional vulnerability index as an additive, right? So we're not asking the World Bank to do away with the per capita income metric, right? Because that's going to be extremely difficult, because that's also used for the low-income countries where we talk about what's called IDA, right? Which is low-income lending for these countries, right? So, but what we're saying is, add this multi-dimensional vulnerability index, and therefore it gives you a different point of view about the vulnerabilities of these countries, and use that as a first gauge in terms of saying the amount of concessional funding that these countries could get. Now, the UN last year actually brought out, after much work, right, brought out a multi-dimensional vulnerability index that could be implemented. And in doing that, the UN task force also did some significant sort of country reports, right, on the vulnerability index as it applied to several countries. So we not only have a data point per se, we actually have analytics that would help the World Bank in terms of how it decides to provide and the amount of concessional financing to Caribbean countries.
Based on our unique vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Senator, good afternoon and thank you so much. You've heard the conversation, climate change. We're having, the least contribution towards what is happening, yet perhaps we are facing the greater burden of climate change. What exactly is your immediate response to this broader call for climate justice from our own Prime Minister and others across the region?
Good afternoon, Mikhail, to you and your listeners, and let me also express their position in terms of those persons who have been affected by Hurricane Beryl. I have been watching the news and I've been in touch with a number of persons, and we have seen and they have experienced the effects of Beryl. And for us, Mikhail, what it means is that if there's ever any doubt that climate change is real, then Beryl highlights that in so many ways. And it also underscores the importance of climate justice. For us, it is so much more than just saying the phrase climate justice. It calls for real, practical, and tangible actions to be taken. I listened to Mr. Rambaran, and he spoke about our economies. And the truth is that that is one of the consideration, and perhaps a significant consideration, because when we look at climate justice, we have to look at our ability to adapt and to mitigate, all of which is impacted by the state and the size of our economies. Mm-hmm. Therefore, within the realm of climate justice, we believe that more has to be done, not said, but more has to be done by the developed countries, by the main polluters, if we were to call them that, to ensure that smaller countries like Caribbean and small island developing states can adapt to deal with the reality of climate change.
All right, Senator, I'm going to ask you to pause there quickly. We're going to take the break and we'll pick up with you when we come back.
Don't lose a thought, please.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is
32 degrees Celsius out west in Montego Bay and 33 here in Kingston.
Oh, every time I pay the rent, it feel like the money could have been better spent. I want something for my own. I want to turn the key in my own home. They make it so convenient when you contact the NHD. No matter your home ownership goal, you can get a loan easily. If owning a home is what you want to do, NHD is here for delivering more. Delivering more.
Attention all teachers, police, medical professionals, soldiers, firefighters, nurses, all civil servants. Get an exclusive 10% off all consultation and hospitalization services. At Hospitan, we know you work hard to serve our community, and now it's our turn to serve you. Don't wait. Visit Hospitan and take advantage of your 10% exclusive offer. Because at Hospitan, we care for those who care for us. Call us today at 876-618-4455 or visit www.hospitan.com. Conditions apply.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing climate justice and what that means for the Caribbean. We were just speaking to Senator Fraser Binns I will ask you to finish that thought before we pick up with our other guests.
Thank you. Yes, I was saying that I heard Theresa spoke about the fact that within the Caribbean, we contribute so very little to the state of our environment, but we are the most impacted. And we fully agree with that. But one of the things that I want to put out for our consideration is that within the realm and the discussion of climate justice, there are support that have been given to small and developing states. And for this conversation, I'll say to Jamaica. It is going to be very important as we look at climate justice and the just transition that we ensure that there's great accountability and transparency in how these financial assistance or any assistance is given. So if, for example, we're going to undertake a debt for nature swap, we have to ensure that the focus is on the place that needs it most. If there's going to be grant funding, we have to ensure that those who need it most are the ones that are benefited. The areas or coastal communities or coral reefs or mangroves are replanted. As much as we can control the extent of our adaptability, we have to ensure it is done. And the other thing I want to say as well, which becomes even more important based on what we saw with Beryl, is we have to do more locally in terms of how we preserve, we mitigate, and we adapt to changing climate. When you look at some of the things that have taken place and some of the damages, one of the things I saw, and it's a conversation that I've been having with other persons in my own group, is whether we now have to look at how do we do our construction. And if we're going to look at that, then it's going to be something that must be led from the state to ensure that persons are building climate resilient homes and infrastructure, so that the next Beryl we have far less damage. We'll never be able to fully mitigate, but certainly there are things that can be done to ensure that we limit the impact of it. Because as we have heard from all the environmental scientists, Beryl is just one of the many effects of climate change, and it is anticipated that we will have so much more than Beryl. So to summarize, from a parliamentarian perspective, I believe that more has to be done in terms of our advocacy, not just as Jamaica standing alone, but as the Caribbean and as small island developing states, to ensure that more support, and I'm saying financial support especially, is provided to small island developing states. And the second point I'm making is that in addition to the advocacy that must be done internationally, more must be done locally to ensure that there is enough steps that are taken to protect and to preserve our environment, to make us more resilient.
I want to pick up on that more must be done locally point with Theresa in particular, because we have worked together on climate related issues, actions that would negatively affect the environment of Jamaican citizens. And through that work we would have highlighted some of the gaps in our legislative framework, and I appreciate the senator bringing that perspective that this is an issue that is parliamentary as well. So I was hoping you could shed some light for us, Theresa, on what those gaps are that we have immediately identified could be filled.
Okay, thanks. So, in terms of, for example, simple things like setback from coast, setback from gullies, setback from rivers, they're the same, they haven't changed. And what we're saying is that, things, as we said, things have to look different. It's a new type of environment. We're looking at the potential to have Category 5, 4 hurricanes more frequently, or more frequently, Mm-hmm. We also need to be thinking about, Senator mentioned about the construction. We have a lot in our development orders, you see, language like should consider. Mm-hmm. The language is very light. We need to be stronger. Everything that enabling environment, government sets the enabling environment, that's very critical here. Building to the standard that it can withstand, that homes and developments can withstand higher level or more intense hurricanes is going to be expensive, right? And nobody is going to necessarily willingly want to take on that because it's so costly, and we tend to think about things in short term. But I mean, reality is that we may have to be looking at things as a requirement. So we may talk about mainstreaming climate change, but I think it's a lot of talk, and we need to move away and really and truly mainstream it in a more meaningful way. It cannot be an add-on. For example, right now, when you see environmental impact assessments being done, you have to mention climate change, but truly, it's not really, when you look at the design of these buildings and these different projects, are they truly taking into consideration climate change? Rainwater harvesting, for example, is another one of those that is mentioned. Oh, we should. It is something that needs to be considered, but at the same time, when we look at it's just a consideration. It's a suggestion,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when we're looking at the future, and it cannot be something that's going to take any length of time, we really need to be, yes, there's some low-hanging fruits that can be considered, but we really need to be targeting this. Funding is going to be something that is absolutely critical, of course. When we think about relocating vulnerable communities, not everybody wants to relocate, but the reality is that these are hard decisions that have to be made. That it may, from a government's perspective, it may be a death nail, in the sense of from voting perspective, but we have to be making long-term decisions as well.
Yeah. Joala, just to pick up with you, bring it back to, the Caribbean-wide perspective and coming out of COP28, going into COP29. What were some of those commitments? I think sometimes we hear the campaign slogans, 1.5, stay alive.
I know that there was a declaration as well.
Yeah. So what are some of those commitments, and how do we ensure that those slogans mean something for people? Because we have people listening in and they hear the climate change deniers and so on. How do we have resonance where every Caribbean citizen, they're listening in and say, you know what? This is what climate justice means for me. And as our leaders go to represent us in November, this is what I want them to be asking for.
All right. Before I sort of get into that in COP28 to COP29, just some, to add to what has already been said. Because the discussion started around, the climate deniers. And, is interesting because if we look at the data for the Caribbean, right, we'll see like over a 70-year period, we've had about 854 named storms. And of those, about 470, or roughly just over half, became hurricanes. And then about another roughly half again, just over 200, became major hurricanes defined as category 3 or higher, right? So the thing is, we actually have not only the information, but over that 70-year period, we've lived through generations, we've lived through the effect of these climate events. So it's pretty hard in a sense to deny it. And then since 1995, what we've actually seen is an increase in the number of tropical storms and hurricanes, but also an increase in the intensity of these tropical storms and hurricanes. So that in itself, is really difficult to deny in the face of the data that exists. The second point I wanted to make was around what Teresa was saying too, is that I think we need, in the Caribbean, we haven't really fully exploited the potential of nature-based solutions. This is something I think we're all basically islands, and we could make more use of the ocean and the ocean assets to protect us. One of the major reasons why Beryl intensified so rapidly is because the waters are warmer. Right now in July, they're at a temperature where they would have been 2 to 3 months later down the road, simply because of the rise in temperatures we experienced since November last year. And that had an impact on our coral reefs. And our coral reefs are actually a line of defense against the intensity of the hurricane. So we're in a catch-22 situation, and it's something like where the Caribbean has to seriously consider how we go about restoring our coral reefs, because they're not only providing significant protection per se along on the coast, right, but they also could provide significant protection from the very hurricanes that we're looking to insulate ourselves from, right? And so that brings me now to COP28, COP29. As we go into COP29, it is really being called a finance COP, because a lot of the financing issues were sort of handed over from COP28 into that, where the international community has to now agree on what is called a new collective quantified, right, finance goal, basically a new climate target, because the industrial countries promised since 2009 that they would support the developing countries with $100 billion a year for climate action. At best, based on the numbers and based on some of the, let me just say, manner in which these countries account for their funding, we may have reached about 80 to 90 billion at best in 1 year, right? So they haven't met the target. Now we're talking about a new target, and while we're talking quantum, what I think is important is that we also need to talk about the quality of the finance, because especially for Caribbean SIDS, if that target is really a target that talks only about loans, it really makes no sense for us. We need to have, as I said, grants and concessional funding as our major source of climate funding.
Yes, and I know the conversation was also anchoring that funding into reparatory justice. So in other words, you know, we were 300 years enslaved, so therefore we're talking about how do you give us grants and aids as compensation. I'm going to ask you three, please, I beg of you, just to stay with us. Let us take the break and then we just take some closing statements before we close out, please.
Is your strata filing its annual returns? In keeping with the Registration Strata Titles Act, strata corporations are required to submit an audited financial statement or a copy of its accounts, prepared in keeping with generally accepted accounting principles, signed by the chairman and at least one other member of the executive committee. This must be submitted annually to the Commission of Strata Corporations within 120 days after the end of the financial year. For more information, contact the Commission of Strata Corporations at 926-9748-9.
Oh, every time I pay the rent, it feel like the money could have been better spent. I want something for my own. I want to turn the key in my own home. They make it so convenient when you contact the NHD. No matter your home ownership goal, you can get a loan easily. If owning a home is what you want to do, NHD is here for you. Delivering more. Delivering more.
On your mark, set, get ready to go! It's time for the True Juice 5K, the one-of-a-kind experience taking you through the beautiful True Juice orchards in Bockwalk, Sunday, July 21, 2024. Register now at truejuice.com. Entry fee only $2,500. Come run, walk, and have fun while raising funds for the Linset Hospital. Follow at True Juice on Instagram for more details.
welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're discussing climate justice and how exactly, as a Caribbean region, we need to be a little bit more vocal on the issues. We recognize that, guess what, we need to do a little bit more in our countries. Improve legislation, improve building codes, and we have other matters, for example, we need to really address. But while we're dealing with that, how do we ensure that the industrial countries, rather, those who are contributing more towards climate change, they are paying up more, giving us the funds so that we can have better protection and mitigation. Joala, we're just going to take last statements from you. If you could finish out the thought before we went on break.
Sure. Basically, I would say Caribbean leaders need to turn this crisis into an opportunity. They have two major political movements before COP29 where they could strike while the iron is still hot. One is Summit of the Future in September, which basically is prepared for the financing for development process that takes place next year under the United Nations. The Summit of the Future actually has an entire financial architecture reform track that these issues fit neatly into, and they could do some significant advocacy there. The second movement is the IMF World Bank annual meetings, which will be held in later October in Washington, D.C. Again, there's an opportunity here to really, as a group, as a bloc, to make some strident calls for what are the changes they would like to see. And then as they move into COP29, just keep building out on the momentum.
Yeah.
And while they do that, Caribbean civil society through CPDC is also continuing its advocacy and its solidarity momentum building that's taking place as it seeks to really build on how we unlock the volume and quality of climate financing that Caribbean SIDS urgently require.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll also take final words from Teresa and then from the Senator.
Yeah. Yes, I definitely agree with those last words by Joala, but I think also as we really come together to advocate for greater funding, especially in the wake of these intensifying hurricanes and storms and events, climate events, we cannot ignore what we can do, that we have control over here in each of our respective Caribbean countries. So from the Jamaican perspective, what can we do? Yes, we know that funding is needed, but we are responsible for crafting our laws or regulations, monitoring and enforcing, development approvals, permits, and so forth. We are in control of that. And we need to take control of that very seriously, while we are also negotiating for greater funding to better adapt to these events. So I want us to also bear that in mind while we're having the conversations.
Thank you for that. And Senator?
I want to pick up where Theresa left off, because I believe that there is in fact an opportunity for us to continue our advocacy on the international scale. But if we do not do what we can at home, then whatever support we get on the international scale will be limited, because we have not implemented laws, we have not enforced our laws. And equally important, we have not engaged our citizenry. So I think that coming out of Beryl, the opportunity exists for us to go back to the drawing board, to start educating and informing our citizens so they understand climate change, but also what it means for them. I think that a number of persons, particularly along the southern coast, southern side of Jamaica, would have experienced perhaps for the first time a real hurricane. I mean, we have tropical storm, but the first time a real hurricane. And because of this lived experience, I can tell you that the anxiety, when I spoke to Jamaicans across the length and breadth, there was just this anxiety. And I think we can turn that anxiety into something positive by educating and informing and taking the country along with us as we seek to adapt to climate change. In addition to the opportunity that exists in terms of public education and taking the country along with us, there is an opportunity for us to go back to the drawing board and start enforcing our laws, start modernizing laws that we need to be. And in fact, even without modernizing, I can say if we just enforce what presently exists, then we would be far in our quest for climate adaptability. So those are some of the things that I think we can do. And while we're doing that, we can continue our advocacy for greater funding, for better debt, for better terms, or for loans, for grants. We can do all of that. But at the end of the day, we have to ensure that the local infrastructure, not just talking about physical infrastructure, but just the local infrastructure is brought up to the level where we can truly adapt and make good of what is a bad situation with climate change. And I think the opportunity has just presented itself. It is really up to us as leaders, and I'm saying leaders in terms of political leaders and other leaders, that it is up to us now to take the charge that awaits.
Thank you so much, Senator. And thank you to all of our guests, Teresa, Joala, for your insight and your expertise on this issue. I think myself and the listeners have learned quite a bit about climate justice.
And your co-host as well.
I can't speak for you. I can speak for the comments.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
We really do appreciate your presence here. Have
Thank
a
you
good
for
day.
having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mikhail, I don't want you to say anything before I give my trivia
No,
response.
we're not at that part as well. Let's not rush the minutes. I was reading some of the comments in the chat, and thank you so much for the engagement. Miss Sunshine, Marigold Weber, as usual, for tuning in. And I just want to read something, news commentator J.A. Climate change is very real. But people and countries too selfish to do what is necessary to help with the problem. Right now, everyone is thinking of profits by all means and cutting costs. I know sometimes the matter of the discussion of climate financing and debt swaps and so on, they're not the most interesting topic for a lot of people. And then it can get a little bit heavy. Because you're talking macroeconomics and so on. But I think it's important that we tune in to have the conversation so that we can encourage our government, so that when CARICOM meets, these are the types of conversations that we should be pushing them to have. I was so heartened again hearing our own Prime Minister speak on this, and I hope he will speak more on this particular issue of climate justice. The Bridgetown Initiative, that was the initiative signed in Bridgetown, Barbados, from Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Again, we heard the call from Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, and you saw the devastation that happened in Grenada. So I think a little bit more outrage needs to be here, so that our own leaders can know that, listen, no more pussyfooting around. We have to rally the troops so that when we speak eloquently and fiercely on this particular issue. And I don't think we should be advocating for loans in that traditional sense. It has to be based on the vulnerability of our countries. It has to be based from the perspective of reparatory justice. Over 300 years of enslavement means that you owe us.
Yeah, one of the things that we didn't get to fully dive into was the debt for climate change kind of discussion, a part of the Bridgetown Initiative, where, because we've been having these developmental loans. What about forgiving some of these loans, and those funds that we would have been paying to these big debtors we use to build our climate resilience?
That's the exact thought behind the debt for swap initiative. So again, how do we break down that type of information for our listeners? And just to lastly indicate, that, one of the things that come to my mind, Jade, personally, when you have natural disasters over the years across administrations, there was a video of a lady sitting on her roof holding down the zinc. And it just brought to my own mind that so many of our citizens are living in areas that are not safe. And it's not because they don't want to move. We have to be asking ourselves what type of opportunities and the sustainable housing solutions that are there. We know that the government has the housing initiative under the office of the Prime Minister. But what exactly, how do we move the National Housing Trust perhaps to be looking at more community-wide scale sustainable housing solutions for the most poor, the most vulnerable? Those were some of the thoughts that came to my own mind as I saw some of those videos, heartbreaking really.
Yeah.
So I think we have to have more discussions on poverty reduction in the country as well. That's another topic, I believe.
Yes, no,
a whole
for sure.
different topic. Yeah,
for sure. But even as you talk about the poverty reduction, that was another aspect of that Bridgetown initiative. That so if we actually look to implement even some of the ideas we already have, we could be addressing things on a multifaceted level.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So you're up on time now.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk about our trivia question now. So our trivia question was, when did Jamaica ratify the Paris Agreement, which speaks to climate action as well? And we ratified the Paris Agreement in, I'm going to tell you right now. We ratified the Paris Agreement April 10th, 2017. I knew it was April 2017. I didn't want to get the date wrong. But we do have a winner. They responded via WhatsApp, and that is Justin Wallace. So congratulations. We will reach out to you via WhatsApp with your prize.
And Justin is a sixth former. So we are reaching the young people. So I'm heartened by that. Yes.
Great.
But thank you so much to our listeners, to our YouTubers who were with us for the hour, paying attention and giving your comments. We really do appreciate all of them. Even the ones that are not so flattering, we do appreciate them as well. It means that we have room to improve. So thank you, and you have a good day.
Jamaicans, by justice, the people's champion. Justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Olympic triumphs in Jamaica Gold. A golden spotlight.
Brought to you by Horton's